Welcome to The Fountain with Ellie Thomas. The fountain is an image that I use in my work often to speak of our multidimensionality, to connect with the life, the living water flowing within us through mind, body, spirit, heart, and all. This show is a place where we explore it all, where we tap into wisdom that has surfaced through pain and joy and the fullness of our journeys. This podcast is a place to come and remember, to sink back into the living water that flows within you and to be guided back to your fountain, your fullness, your wholeness, and how to be with that as we navigate living as divine humans in this wild, wild world and this wild, wild journey. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in together and be refreshed and consoled by the water that wants to flow through. Welcome back to the fountain. So glad to be here with you today. Got a lot to share, a lot of announcements and just updates, and then some reflections around grief and grieving in the summertime and embracing the discomfort of grief that have been swirling in many arenas recently. And a lot of these reflections are pieces of my journey or intuitive landings that have come through in past moments. And as I've stepped into a different stage of my grief journey in the past, 9 months or so, it's not quite as present for me, but I've been in a lot of conversations where these reflections have popped back up. And one of those conversations with a good friend who just lost her mom, and start conversations of remembering that really raw, core time right after a loss has brought so many memories and lessons and reflections back up. And it's been really fascinating to sit with it and then to remember them and offer them to clients and in other conversations. And in this sanctuary, we had a grief flow in June, and a lot of big grief themes came up. And afterwards, I got right on a video to record my reflections because there were some really big key kind of points and themes that were arising. And as soon as I did, the video went for too long to post. So I decided to save it, and in a little while, I'll let you have the audio here. But I wanted to share some other things first and some other reflections that didn't even fit into that video that have been coming up. So as we enter July and round out June, holy moly, June was a massive month in my household. The sanctuary doors opened at the very end of May, and we had our first 3 calls in June. And then around the 20th of June, right with the solstice, all of this great feedback and also intuitive understanding and simplicity started to come in around what the sanctuary was actually supposed to be now that we were in operation. And it's funny because the sanctuary has been letting me know for a couple of years, has been refining and telling me and letting me know, this is what the space is and this is what the space is. And the energetic aspect of it and the beauty of it has always stayed the same, the frequency, the energetic frequency of it. But in the practicality of how that looks for you as a member, that has been shifting. And I think now I have landed. It feels very clear and solid and ready to be what this new iteration is. But it has involved a few updates in the past few weeks. And if you don't follow along on Instagram or read my newsletters, I really want to make sure you know about that because it feels really rich, really abundant, really spacious, but supportive at the same time. And there's a lot more space for one-on-one support. There is, just a lot more space for fluidity, which, hello, this is what we are all about here, is embracing the fluidity and meeting the moment. And that is like my pride and joy, my specialty, and such an important offering for me to or energy to have in my offerings. So the sanctuary went last week from being a 2-tier member level thing to just simplifying it, and everything is available for all members now. And with this new iteration, there's also additional calls. And so there are now 3 sacred tending, liberated expression type calls, but these are now mentorship calls. And so at the beginning, there will be a theme, and I will share on the theme and teach on the theme and guide you through a practice to connect to yourself and how the theme might be weaving in you for maybe the first 20 to 30 minutes. And then we will have at least an hour. And if there's a good sized group, we will have an hour and a half of one-on-one space. So it will be in the context of a group call, but you can raise your hand or let me know that you want to work on something or there's something you're struggling with, and we will just work on it together there. And I will be able to guide you through deeper connection, deeper awareness, really sink into what's happening in your greater awareness so that you can kind of clear what needs to be cleared and receive what's ready to be received. And every time I have facilitated group coaching, what's incredible about it is that even if the circumstances of somebody else's life that's on the call might not be exactly like yours, or maybe you don't fully relate, and oftentimes you actually do, but the themes and what's present is really powerful for everyone on the call. And people can, as I'm working with one person and then the next, however much space and whoever is ready for that on the call, as I'm working with them, you can be going through, if it's not you that's in the hot seats, so to speak, you can be going through the same work within yourself and seeing what comes up. So I've been a long-time facilitator of group things in my entrepreneurial journey, and they are some of my favorite things. And then I've also been a big receiver of group sessions, and I just have always gotten so much from offering them and from receiving in them. And I'm really excited for that to just be an open space. And also I can feel how it will grow us as a community in the sanctuary. So now there will be 3 of those calls a month. And then there will be 1 live grief flow. And the price of the sanctuary has increased to, in this new era of founding memberhood, it has increased to $55 a month, and that special founding member pricing will go through mid-August. And the nice thing about this readjustment is that I can now also offer the grief flows as being available to the public for people that don't want to join but want to just join a one-off grief flow or just want to join the grief flow every month. And so soon I will be sharing about how you can join the July grief flow for just $33 if you don't want to become a member, but you do want to kind of feel into grief that's moving in your life and your body. And these are such profound and unique spaces. These grief flows are, I don't know, I just feel really honored to be able to bring them forth and offer them. And now I love that there's a context to offer them monthly. And a lot of times people don't realize how much grief is just present in our life all of the time. And so they might see this and be like, oh no, that's not for me. I'm not grieving anybody. And cool, if that's you, cool. And I can promise you that if you just feel the simple tug or call of your soul to join one, so much will come of it. This is a huge emotional, somatic, energetic, intuitive exploration, and there's so much that comes up no matter what you're working with. So now you can join that even if you don't want to become a sanctuary member, so keep your eyes and ears out for that. And lastly, for the announcements, I have been going through Awaken Your Flow to kind of revamp it. I've had some ideas and I'll share those with you in a second. But oh my goodness, Awaken Your Flow is so good and it's free. So if you haven't stepped into it go explore it. I have also had the idea of adding a option to just listen to all 5 days straight through, kind of in a podcast. I can't do that as a video, but in the audio only version I can. So I will be adding that very soon if you are an Awaken Your Flow member. And this feels great because you can almost like go on a 90-minute walk, or maybe it's even longer than 90 minutes, but go on a long walk, or if you're on a long drive. Sometimes what I like to do when I re-listen to teachings is to get in the car or go on a long walk. And even though I might not be sitting down and doing the practices exactly as the person is telling me, just moving with them in a light, subtle way and keeping my consciousness and my focus attuned to them while also moving my body is extremely powerful for me. And I've had so many great aha moments doing that. And so I had the idea to add that really long version so you can just listen straight through to all 5 days and all the nuggets in there, and go back to the practices when you have more space and time if you want to. You will get so much out of it, even though you might not be actively practicing, and then you'll get loads more when you do have space to actively practice. But I also have had the idea of adding the initial sanctuary call, which I have made a free version of it. And that free version of it is all about tapping into creating the foundation within yourself for inner mastery. And it goes hand in hand with Awaken Your Flow. So I will be adding very soon, if you are an Awaken Your Flow member, that first sanctuary call, the edited, just public version of it, to the Awaken Your Flow course, and you will have access to that too. That one's a little bit over an hour long, and it's very, very powerful. I really loved that a sanctuary member said to me the other day after Grief Flow that first call really did create some kind of opening. She wasn't even sure what it was yet, which is great. You don't need to know what it is. But the fact that there's movement and there's an opening happening, that's what that call is all about. And just starting to create space and to tap in and to be more connected. So feel free to check those out. They're great listens. I will be adding those nuggets and really beautiful additions to the Awaken Your Flow journey probably within the next week. So keep your eyes out for that. I'll let you know via email if you already are an Awaken Your Flow member, so you can check that out. And then I think that's all. I think that, I think I'm ready to dive into these grief themes that have been coming up. So the first one that came up after having a conversation with my friend, and then I woke up from a dream one morning remembering it. And I actually have a whole podcast where I talk about this, which is called Born Through Grief. I think that's what it's called. I go into this imagery and I really dive deep into this more there. So if you feel called afterwards, you can go re-listen to that one. But this imagery that I received in a meditative time when I was like sitting on this bench in the middle of winter under these owls that we would visit every day. They would just be perched in this tree above our favorite bench on our morning walk. And I was preparing to teach a sacred grief class in my mentor Pilar Lesko's membership. And I had a sense of what we were going to explore, but I just kind of sat there in meditation and said, like, owls, how do you see grief? And as I was sitting with the owls, I just got this image of an atom bomb. And as I explored it, I understood more this imagery and the transformational grief journey that came along with it. And it has become such a helpful way of seeing grief, whether it be post-death, somebody's death, or a big loss, or whether it be after just a big severance in your life of some kind. I find that it offers a lot of permission to be where you are, to lean into the fact that this is a lifelong journey and that it changes over time. So the imagery was this: when an atom bomb goes off, there is of course the initial explosion, which is the severance, the death, this huge moment, like this parting of lands. And another idea that came to mind when I was talking to a client about it this week was the separation of two lands as an earthquake happens along a fault line. And with that, there's this feeling of we're never going back. Things are never going back to how they were before. So any moment that's like this in your life, the atom bomb kind of represents that moment, that explosion, that severance, that shifting of the tectonic plates that will never return to how they were before in your life. And also when the atom bomb goes off, it creates, infinite ripples that extend out for miles and miles to come. And when it comes to grief, I like to think about it as like infinite ripples that extend backwards in times, forwards in times, and to all our sides, all parallel timelines. And to me, the imagery of this shows just this impacts every part of your life beyond what you can even imagine. Like it's moving back in time, forward in time, and to the sides, like I said. And so the path of embodied grieving, transformational grief, conscious grief, whatever you want to call it, I don't really know that there's a perfect word for it, but I see this path as just the invitation and having the willingness to show up and meet the ripples as they come. And if you are at the center of that bomb when it goes off, like you are the core, right? And so as you take steps out of, at first it's just so much debris and so dark and you can't see anything and it's overwhelming and you don't know what's up and down and right and left and it's all encompassing. And then as you slowly stumble through it and take steps forward, whatever that looks like. And by the way, you may even be in shock. Imagine somebody in a war movie that you've seen and a bomb going off and their ears ringing and they're stumbling around and they can't even see straight. Shock is a huge part of that first part. And so as we take steps a little bit further away from this core moment of severance, we begin to have a little bit more visibility, but we hit these ripples upon ripples upon ripples. And at the beginning, in my experience, the ripples are super close together. So you might be hit with one every hour, or you might be hit with one, probably more than once a day. You will be hit with grief ripples of all shapes and kinds, and you won't be able to control it. And the intention around how to show up and how to connect with it is just allowing yourself to move with the ripples as you meet them and as they meet you. And over time, the ripples get further apart, but then you hit one in an unexpected moment, and maybe there's 3 or 4 together, and then there's a big gap again. So the way that they play in time is not linear, of course. And no one person's journey can be compared to the other because no bomb is going to go off and look exactly the same. The ripples aren't going to fall and lay in the same way. They're not going to touch the same things in somebody's life. These ripples touch everything in your life. And so the only core piece for me that I really encourage you when you're reflecting on it, or if you're walking through this right now, is to connect with, am I willing to just keep meeting the ripples? And there might be days when your answer to that is no, this effing sucks, because it does. It really, really sucks. And especially being in the void or just being hit time after time after time, really in a short time period with the ripples, it's draining. And you may not have energy. And it's okay that in some moments you don't want to meet the ripples. You don't have to be okay, yeah, bring it on, ripple. It's more a deep heart resonance of I don't want to be doing this. I don't want my life to be this right now. And yet I don't have another choice. There's this moment of a choiceless choice that comes in. And so when you have strength again, and when you have the ability to just take a moment, breathe, and acknowledge where you are, oftentimes there can be a revival of this, okay, I can take one step today. I can do the absolute bare minimum that is just, meeting the basic needs, and let the ripples come to me, and I can ask for support, and I can really treat this rawness with loving, gentle space. And then there might be some moments where like you don't have that space, and that's okay. You might need to be working. You might need to be tending to your kids. You might be in the middle of who knows what, millions of different things, a move, a huge life transition that doesn't even have to do with this severance or this death. These are big things. And so it's okay that in every moment you're not just like, yes, I'm ready for this ripple. But the overall arching theme here is, am I willing to just humbly as can be, grief is so humbling, say, okay, I'm ready to meet the ripples when they come. And an important part of this is that we enjoy, and you enjoy, the reprieve between the ripples, and you restore and you receive what you need to have the strength to continue to meet the ripples as they come. And so when I was having this conversation with a good friend, she was at a totally different place because of the timing and just what's happened in her life. And then when I talked to a client about it, we talked more about it in reflection of something that happened like a year and a half ago. And now her being able to look back and see the process of that severance and how intense it was, and how by meeting the ripples and just deciding time after time after time to messily, imperfectly show up and to be met by ripples and meet the ripples and rest in between, how she's gotten to such a different place. And again, I share this sort of stuff a lot. Like, naturally, the process of getting to a different place happens just by being able and willing to meet the ripples or be touched by them, because they will transform us over time. And so you don't even have to worry about trying to get to a different place. And actually, in grief, we can just want it to be over. We can want it to be done. And my recommendation is to take your eyes off of just getting to the other side, because who knows what the other side is actually going to look like, who you will be at the other side. And so this is an invitation into presence, into saying what is right in front of me, and how can I meet myself, and how can I meet what's happening, and how can I ask for support to be able to move through this, and that I can trust too that in the long haul, these ripples are going to feel different. And I had my own ripple this week, and it was coming across a voicemail from my mom that I was not expecting to play. I accidentally hit play, and whoa, was it jarring, and did it wave over me in an incredible way that I haven't felt in a while. And so when I was sharing that later with a friend, I was like, yep, I hit another ripple today, and just feeling really sad. And they're never not humbling in my experience. Maybe for you, you've had a different experience, but being able to look at grief and the grief path this way is, I hope, really permission giving for you, and can help you come present, because presence is actually a huge part of moving with grief. There is, of course, tons of reflection that can happen and tons of remembrance of how things were before. And yet being present is the vehicle through which we actually move through the process of grief. And as we enter the ability to be present with ourselves in our process, we can start to access something that I don't know if I've talked about on the podcast, but I've definitely talked about and written about before, called attuned pace. I came to this idea of attuned pace about 6 months after my mom died, when the only way it felt like I could count on showing up was with attunement to how I was feeling, how my body was feeling, how my emotions were feeling every day. And as I gave myself permission to explore and find my own attuned pace, I felt like I could meet life more, and I felt like I could meet grief more, and I felt like I could be in relationship with more people in my life, because I wasn't trying to be something that I wasn't, and I was allowing more people in, and I was just finding more comfort, which can take a long time, in feeling how I felt and not needing to change it. And there's something so powerful around seeing grief or a grief journey of any kind as an invitation to connect with your attuned pace. And your attuned pace will change over the course of your life. This is obviously a very different moment for me now, where my attuned pace is much more energetic and much more active and much more maybe outwardly visible and alive than it was then, but it was where I was at the time, and it changed when it was ready to change. And the only way that I personally could stop resisting being where I was, which was actually the theme of a call we just did inside the sanctuary, was accessing more permission to be exactly where you are, especially in seasons like this. As I accessed more permission to be where I was, this idea of attuned pace came to me, and it gifted me the invitation to just tune in. What is right in front of me? How am I feeling today? What would it be like to own the energy that I have today and not need it to be any different? And this is really radical. This is a huge piece of my grief journey that I feel like is a really radical shift. And it's radical because we don't live in a world that allows us to do this very easily. And it's really hard to simply attune to our own pace and then step out into a buzzing world and to calibrate to how that can feel different sometimes, how it can feel weird to be moving at one pace within and feeling the pace of life outside of us. And it's not that one is life and not one isn't, but they're just different vibrations and different expressions of life. And so the meeting of them together can have some crunchiness or can feel a little bit strange. And so beginning to breathe into this idea that as I meet the ripples of the atomic explosion, what would it be like to attune to what my pace is, the pace that I have available to move with this ripple, how I want to move inwardly and outwardly in my life right now, how this ripple is impacting my pace. What would it be like to allow yourself to be as you are, and first within yourself? And we need to take some time often to just sink into that within ourselves and give ourselves permission to experience that, which is what we were doing in the sanctuary when we worked on this theme this week. But also then, once we feel like we can embody that a little bit more on our own, to take a few steps outside of yourself, like so in your household, in your yard, in your neighborhood, and see what it feels like to feel full ownership and permission to be operating in your attuned pace. For me, this was revolutionary. It really changed this whole sense of expectation and pressure that I had around what I wanted grief to look like, how I wanted to be afterwards, or in the midst of the journey, what I wanted to be able to still do that I felt like I couldn't do. Just the invitation to begin to attune to my pace was such a transformative moment for me in allowing myself to show up in my life as I was and have the trust that others would be able to meet me, I would be able to meet myself, the world would be able to meet me. And it took some time to really sink into this and really trust this, but also that I would be loved, that people would still be there. Like these are some, if you've listened to my story, like these are some of my core fears and core feelings. And I think they're really, everyone has their own version of this, but they're often really common ones. And in grief, it can feel really, really lonely. And so that loneliness can cause us to fight against our state because it's uncomfortable. And the more that I was able to feel like, okay, I can just attune to my pace. What is the pace of my body and my heart and my emotions and soul today? And if I attune to that, can I let that be enough? And when I let that be enough, I started to create openings where I wasn't so worried and fixated on the loneliness anymore. I still felt alone because grief is a lonely journey, and yet there was more space for others to be able to come and walk beside me. So I am going to leave that initial reflection around the atom bomb and attuned pace at that, and just take a moment now and see what really resonated, what felt true and alive for you here. And you'll hear a tiny bit of musical transition, and then you'll hear the last part of this reflection, which is about a 10-minute snippet of a video that I created after our last grief flow around some really big themes. These are including how to meet discomfort and allow ourselves to sink beyond the discomfort to connect with grief, moving with grief in summertime, and then how to move in the void of grief when you can't see beyond what's happening right now when you can only look like you're in the thick of the ripples and can only look one step in front of you. And it can be dizzying and overwhelming. So I have some tips on that too. So here you go. Hi there. Coming out of our Grieve and Release flow from within the Sanctuary membership, and so many big themes coming through today. The first was the theme of just really beginning to tap into a new layer of access and a new layer of capacity that we might have to be with whatever is moving in our experience on an emotional and energetic level by noticing the places where a very protective discomfort can kind of stop us or kind of push us away from it, and beginning to get friendlier with that discomfort, to recognize it, to bring awareness to it, and to say, oh, hey, there's a lot of discomfort here. And then to practice breathing into it and opening ourselves, just asking, how fully can I turn towards and be with this discomfort? And then the beautiful things about Grieve and Release flows is that there's some music that I play through them, and the music can help soften us in. And sometimes the way into our deeper experience, which emotions and energies that are moving in us and around us, only have the space to transmute, to alchemize, to do whatever they need to do as we can turn towards them and engage in them. And it doesn't need to be beyond our capacity. It can just be with what we can engage with at the moment. And when we do turn towards that and have the support of the music, sometimes we can't access it. Well, most of the time, we can't access it from an intellectual realm. So the music really helps to just let the body be in motion. And even if there isn't a direct connection to the emotions that starts to come through tears or verbal noises, letting the body just move intuitively with the music starts to lubricate your greater system. And so today we spent a lot of time just exploring that discomfort and then seeing what was underneath that and what we could actually sink into and touch into and see what wanted to happen there. And then another theme that came up was around the discomfort that we can have when we are experiencing grief in any layer, in any size, in any capacity in our lives, when it's summer outside and when everybody seems to be in this summer mode. And whether this just be a quick short wave of grief or something that actually feels like a longer season, it can feel like there isn't space for that. And so if you are in a longer season of grief, whether it be an old grief that you're just moving through now or something that's new that came up, oh my goodness, I was talking with my sister and somebody else today about, and it came up again in our grief flow, about being in an inner winter on an inner level, and how uncomfortable that is when the season outside of us does not match that. And it's actually the exact opposite. And so that can create this tension where we're resisting against where we are. And in the resistance, we're creating even more exhaustion for ourselves because we're like battling against it. When my sister said something really great when we were on the phone talking about this today, she said, yeah, but there is a way to engage with summer where we can allow it to nourish our inner winter. And she's totally right. And so we talked about that on the call too. We talked about how the ways that we can allow summer to nourish where we are, external summer to nourish where we are, even though we're not going to be able to grasp, or we can try to grasp, but we're probably not going to be able to touch into the things that summer maybe represents to us or that we think they are in the same way, because our energy is different in an inner winter. It takes a lot more capacity than what you may have to experience those things. But what could you experience? There's actually a lot of nourishment that could be available for your moment, no matter where you are. And so that might look like, I know in a moment of my grief where I was in a total inner winter and it was summer outside, I, as many days as I could, would go to the park, lay down a blanket, have a bag of grapes because I love grapes or cherries in the summertime and they make me think of my mom. And I would lay there and just enjoy laying there, or I would read or listen to Bridgerton. And this was before Bridgerton was like such a thing, but just having kind of a summary novel and something that was so beyond my world to tap into and explore and escape to just nourished me to the core in those moments when I couldn't move at the same pace that I wanted to or normally could. And one last thing that came up, it's really just about acknowledging and claiming our inner seasons and then not needing to fight against them anymore, like I was saying, not needing to resist against them. And one thing that's really hard about inner winter is you can forget what it feels like to be in your inner summer. You can forget who you are in inner summer. It's just like living where I live in the Midwest. In the dead of winter, you have no recollection. You cannot pull into your memory at all what it feels like to be in summertime. It's just long enough when you think it's never going to end. And so allowing yourself to acknowledge and just sink into the surrender, and this might have to happen every day, sink into the surrender of, I want to be somewhere that I'm not yet. I'm going to breathe in and release any anger or any frustration that I have around not being there yet. And then I'm going to allow myself after that release, even if it's just like one breath of to sink back into the surrender of, but here I am. And one of the really important parts of being in an inner winter or experiencing grief in a summertime, external summer, or when just it's not congruent between your inner and outer seasons, is to allow yourself to not need to fight against where you are and to say, I am going to trust that even though that I can't see the exit, I can't see what my next season will look like yet. I don't know what it feels like yet. I don't remember what it feels like to be in that next season. But I'm going to trust that that will come. And so what do I need to be supported and connected with? And what do I need to just allow myself to be nourished where I am? A lot can happen just by creating that kind of space. And this is a very, very common process in grief of needing to allow ourselves to trust that there's a new season that will come, even though we can't see it or imagine it yet. And then so much energy we can start to call back to ourselves from the battle that we're up against within, like creating that resistance. We can start to receive that energy back, and that actually nourishes our process. So if you want to explore this more, my 5 spheres of the transformational process podcast is an awesome one. The fluid structure, the podcast about creating fluid structure in times of transition, is another great one. And of course, you can join the sanctuary and engage and explore the grief flow that we did today and what's coming up for you. And there's so many beautiful explorations and nuggets of wisdom there. So I hope this serves you, if any of this pertains to you today. Thank you so much for listening to The Fountain. please take a moment to rate and review the show and to send it along to a friend that comes to heart or mind. I'd also love to hear what came up for you and your experience listening to the most recent episodes. So reach out via your podcast app or send me an email. And if you'd like to book your first session or explore working together more, find me at ellieflow.com.